So my name is Sheila Minkah-Premo. I'm a lawyer and currently I work at Apex Law Consults, a law firm in Accra. And then I also do development consultancy work, and then I'm a women's rights advocate. I would say that it started when I was young. I grew up with a grandmother who was very conscious of gender, and the way she brought me up, I lived with her from when I was about 3 years, about 11 years. And for me, she made a big impact on me. And she made me understand that you had to look out for the interests, particularly of women. She was a minister's wife, and I lived with her in 2 stations. And in each station, she was the president of the Women's Fellowship. So she would take me along. And I saw, for me, she was the first woman leader that I saw. And in terms of gender, I was living with her with 2 brothers. And the way she brought me up, when I was being taught how to cook, my brothers were also cooking. So for me, she showed me that, first of all, issues about gender consciousness and the fact that if you have some abilities, you should use it to help others, particularly women. Her bias was also women. So I learned a lot from her. When I became a lawyer in 1989, at that time, the International Federation of Women Lawyers, they had their office very close to where I was working. And they invited the women lawyers then. At that time, out of a class of 60, were 11 women. So they invited us to a tea party, told us what they were doing to help women, and that we should also give back with the skills we've acquired. And I caught it right on. I think in my year, I was the only one who continued to go there, volunteered at the Legal Aid Center, and did a lot of outreach, and I've never turned back. So after completing law school, as I indicated, I started practice at the bar, and I volunteered a lot at FIDA Ghana. So there was this scholarship opportunity in the year 1993, where Georgetown University's Law Center, they had this Women's Law and Public Policy Fellowship program, had started another subgroup called the Leadership and Advocacy for Women in Africa program, LAWA program, as a component of their original fellowship. And the idea was to bring women lawyers who are already working on gender-related issues to the Georgetown to undertake a master's program, do an internship, and to come back to use the additional skills acquired to help in their country. So the initial countries was Ghana, Uganda, and Tanzania. So I attended FIDA Ghana, put up my name because they saw that for about 5 years, I was really volunteering a lot, very active, participating in the advocacy programs, doing court cases, etc. So they added my name to the list of people recommended. So I went for the interview, and I was successful, because all the issues that a number of professors came from the school asking about gender-related issues, and they were all things that I'd had practical experience in. So I was taken on. I told them for the first year, I had just gotten married, so I told them I wouldn't be able to go for the first year, but they said it was going to go on for the next 3 years. So the second year, they just wrote to me to come for the program, and I learned a lot doing the program, because apart from the academic course, there were also seminars on gender-related issues where they would bring people from different sectors, Human Rights Watch, people working with prisons, women in prison, etc., etc. Like a seminar where we would interact with them. And then when I finished the program, I was placed at an institution called Women in Law and Development. It was an organization, DC, which came out of one of the women's conferences, on women's conferences. So basically, that was sort of the head office, and they were working, at that time, they were preparing for the Beijing conference. So I always remember they were working particularly on the issue of domestic violence. The UN Special Rapporteur on violence against women had asked them to do a survey, worldwide survey, to see how countries were addressing violence against women and to document it. And so I participated in that was a project that I worked on, and I was very active in working on it, came up with a booklet. And I wouldn't call it a booklet, a whole book, because it looked at, it sampled a number of countries and the actions were taken, and then they concluded that, look, most countries had realized that ordinary criminal laws were not being used adequately to address it. So a lot of countries at that time, this was in 95, had begun coming up with specialized legislation to address it. But they thought the general criminal law wasn't addressing it. And so I went, the program also sponsored us to go to the Beijing conference where this book was launched. And I was proud to have been part of that particular book, and then other activities. We also participated in the NGO fora, etc., etc. So, I've always loved women issues and pushing the barrier. And FIDA also taught me that with our skills, we can actually push for legislation and policy to make lives better for women. So, as a young person, I learned a lot from them. I also got the opportunity to go to a lot of conferences outside the country to also learn from others as well. I always remember my first conference was in Arusha, Tanzania, and I learned a lot. And I've learned a lot, and I think I've also used what I've learned to push for some legislation and policy. So as I said, I started off with FIDA. Then after I came back from the lower program, we also set up an alumni group doing similar work, but doing more of what we call legislative advocacy. So I think in 2008, I got a call from the bar, the bar presidents, that they had to change the leadership. They had this Women and Men's Rights Committee, which also does a lot of outreach. And they wanted me to be the president, to be the chair of that committee. So I accepted to do that. Just a small group, about 10 people, always had one man at the point. From 2008, like I said, they kept sort of repeating me as the chair, because I guess they were happy with the work I was doing, because usually every committee is supposed to report. The bar has about 10 plus committees. There are years when some committees don't report at all, but since I became the chair, every year from 2008, we always reported. There were times when we're the only committee that had a report in the annual report. So whilst doing our work, I kept indicating that many countries had a group that looked out for the interests of women lawyers. We didn't have it here. I think in 2005, I had been invited to South Africa. Their women, they call it, they had the Law Society, and they had the agenda group. So they invited us, me and people from other countries, West Africa and other countries, to share, issues to do with women at the bar. What are their issues? What are their numbers? What are their challenges? And for me, that conference actually opened my eyes a lot. So I kept telling my colleagues that, look, we should try and push for a group that is looking out for women interests. Either we ask them to expand the mandate of the Women and Men's Rights Committee, or we push. I wrote a few memos. It wasn't getting much results. So, like I said, I think the one who was the president in 2014. So I said, look, the women want to meet the women and start to let them also articulate their issues. So 2014, they allowed us to have the first conference in Cape Coast then, I remember. And so it was interesting having a cross-section of women lawyers, older lawyers, younger lawyers. So everybody thought, yeah, it's a good idea to really do this. So we indicated that in between the bar conferences, we'd also see whether we can have some networking sessions. So we've done a few networking sessions where we're doing more like coaching. So we'd get women from different areas of the law practice. Those in corporations, those in practice, those with academia, those working with NGOs. We had about 6 different categories to come and share their experience, and then the young people will have questions for them, etc., etc. For me, I thought it was interesting. So in one of those sessions, one of those networking sessions, there was a delegation from the US, the National Bar Association. So they attended one of our sessions. They said, oh, they have a group like that which has been there for years. Actually, they're almost 40 years then. So they said, then they think that we can have a partnership so that we can also learn a little more from them. Yeah. So that angle was there, but we continued having those seminars. Then we even pushed more and said, we also wanted most of their continuing legal education. At the bar conferences, they always do CLE sessions, continuing legal education sessions, always on commercial, something or other. So we said we wanted one on issues, family law related issues. We didn't go, so they granted us the first opportunity to do one, I think in 2020, and it was oversubscribed. It went along, it was being held at the time when the commercial law related issue. People didn't want to go to the commercial law one. People came to the room, sitting on tables because the room was full. We realized that these issues were that was a property rights to spouses bill. So the next year, similar, and like I said, so we think that it's also a pattern where we give an opportunity to be able to talk about issues to do with women. And then also through the advocacy and memos to the bar leadership, they decided to, in their amendments of their constitution, to include the women's forum of the bar in there. So last year, there was a vote and people voted for it. So once they've now come up with the text of the amended constitution, so they said there's going to be elections. As somebody who's been there babying this whole thing for a while, I've decided I'll go for the first presidency, then I'll hand over to some other people. So I'm in the process of getting ready to get the nominations done to push for it. I think that once you are properly inaugurated, there will be a lot of opportunity for us to make an impact, to enable women to come together to deliberate on issues of concern to us. We started off with the Gold Coast bar, from 1887. At that time, it was mainly men. Up till 1945, when we had the first female, and slowly we have having them. So it was a male-dominated organization for a long time, and that is, I guess, it's a patriarchal kind of organization. Yes. So there've been a few attempts by some women to vie for the highest leadership. We've had a woman vice president before. She was an older woman, Mrs. Besemete, and we tried to encourage her to go for the presidency, but she did not. There've been two women who've actually vied for the presidency, but they've not been successful. And for me, that is not good enough, for an organization that has existed for this long. And now we have quite a number of women who are in there, and we still don't have a female president. If you go to the bar center now, in their conference room, they have pictures of all the former bar presidents, not a single woman. I think that it's a big gap. And maybe it's about time we should start thinking about an affirmative action kind of policy to ensure that a woman gets there. The whole thing is to be able to encourage a woman strong enough to go and stand. And we have to be strategic. The strategy we've been advised is that the last person, she had served at the bar executive before, but she went off. And then she came vying for the presidency. People think that they normally would reward the vice president. So maybe in the next election, we should try and push somebody in there as a vice president, and then the person can move up. But we are thinking of different ways in which we can try and address this, because it's about time that was addressed, for us to have a female president at the bar. Definitely, men have a big role to play, because even though women's numbers have come up, we still haven't reached, we are not at par with them. So when it comes to those active at the bar, particularly those who are active at the bar, incidentally, you may see a lot of women on the roll, but very few women are in private practice or in working with government, Attorney General's office, who actually come for these conferences. The women working in the corporate environment, not all of them are very active on issues relating to the bar. So whether we like it or not, a lot of the people on the roll who would attend bar conferences and vote are male. So we need them. So we need to start negotiating with them. I think we need to raise awareness. I think that in one of the CAD sessions, I think we should talk about affirmative action, because it's something which is misunderstood by a lot of people. And in terms of applying it to a particular organization, I know it's not going to be easy, because of this perception that you are softening the ground for women who are not qualified, whatever. So we need to look for a very qualified woman who is prepared to stand and who will be supported, and who all of us should join the advocacy in making sure that she's accepted. And in that process, we need to sensitize men about the need for us to have a woman in leadership in there. We have a lot to do. Ghana has done so well, but I think in one of even your sessions that we participated in, you can see other countries have gone way ahead. Sierra Leone, for instance. I remember that session. So we need to ensure that we have more women in leadership. We need to create an enabling environment to make that possible. And so we need to raise people's gender consciousness, because it's, when somebody is born with privilege, unless you actually let them know that you need to think beyond your privilege, it doesn't automatically happen. So we have a lot of work to do to sensitize them. We would have to come up with strategies on how we can do that effectively and not let them feel threatened that the women want to take over. There's always this threat that the women want to take over. So we need to dialogue with them, and we need to get the men to support. So far, I would say we've had some male allies. Like I said, when we pushed to have the women's forum, it was the male leaders who were in place, and they accepted it. When we pushed to have seminars, CLEs, at the bar conferences, it's also the same males who accepted it. So I think that we have to continue with the negotiation with them, and also to look for the right type of woman who is willing and ready to stand for that higher position, and to try to encourage them forward. For women, I mean, during the last conference and the last election, you could see a lot of people were being very petty, looking at issues to do with personality and not getting a woman there. So we have a lot of work to do to also sensitize women on the need to get women in leadership as something that they need to do, and not look at the person's personality and little resentment that they have against the person. And so for me, the sensitization has to go both ways. We need to build the women up to be able to support each other. We need a lot of coaching, as is very, very important, and we need a lot of informal ways of passing on knowledge to the younger ones to be able to accept and also be ready to step into our shoes as well as we are moving on. We are very hopeful. The key thing about the Women's Forum that has now been accepted is that at the bar, the highest body is the national, they call it the Executive Council. So as the president of the Women's Forum, that person will have space there. So that's the highest place where it should be possible to be able to articulate some issues very clearly. So I'm hoping that whether it's me or anybody else who goes there, we'll encourage that person to dialogue with them at that higher level. That is a very big body made up of past presidents, as well as presidents of, I think, some regional bars, etc. So it's a big group. And there are only also a few women there, but there are very few women presidents at the regional bars, and then a few other positions. But I believe that once we get there, we will have to really go out of our way to educate and sensitize them, so that we will see a more gender-friendly bar. A more gender-friendly bar is necessary because, as I indicated from the onset, increasingly we are getting more and more women at the bar. And when they come there, they've gone to the schooling, and then they get qualified and come. Those of us who sort of preceded them should have identified and addressed some of the challenges they're likely to face, and have those challenges addressed. It would help. Again, more women at the bar would mean that policies that come out from the bar will become more and more gender friendly, so that they will think through things and then make sure that these policies are more gender friendly. Again, in the population of Ghana, we have more women than men. And in many sectors, we still have the men dominating because it's a patriarchal society. So I think that representation of women is something that we need to face. And any institution or organization that closes doors to the ultimate leadership to women will not be seen as progressive as we are moving on. And it would also not help with development of that particular institution. We need it.